Um, you kind of alluded a little bit earlier. What are your thoughts on future funding of the Mesquite Regional Economic Development Organization? And should the current council reduce its funding, increase its funding, or dissolve the organization altogether?
So my understanding is that the current amount that we give MRED is around $200,000. And that is significant. It's not nothing. And I think that it's fair to ask after a certain period of time, what are we getting for our money? It's a tough decision. I am not in favor of just outright cutting it and eliminating it entirely. I think that if anything, we need to be looking at either ensuring that the money that we're being spent is, that we're getting something for it and we're getting enough for it. And if we're not, then the question becomes, is it because of lack of funding or is it because there's another alternative out there? And I think that that's something that council needs to look at. And I think they need to have an honest conversation with MRED with regards to the results that we've seen and the opportunities that we've missed. If we've missed opportunities, we need to understand why. Is it because of a lack of funding? If so, I would be in favor of increasing it. Is it an understanding that, you know what, another agency or another department or another person would potentially have been able to do better? I think that's a conversation to be had. And it has nothing to do against people at MRED now. It has everything to do with just from a city's council standpoint, you have to look at it and make sure that the money that spending, the money that the city is spending is being used effectively. And if the answer is it's not being used effectively, then we need to ensure that it is. I think that MRED has a lot of golden opportunities, and I think that there's a lot of good that they could potentially do. And hopefully I will start to see some turnaround.
Okay. Should more of the city's budget dollars be spent on income-producing and business-generating activities like new sports fields, amphitheaters, concert venues, etc.?
Interesting question. My view of the city is it is a service. It provides for the community's needs. I think that when you start to view the city as a whole as a money-making machine, I think that you lose sight of what I anticipate is the reason for government existence, which is for the community. However, I think that there are opportunities where the city could potentially be opening the doors and allowing for more opportunities to serve. So I do think that with regards to, for example, ball fields are not, we're not just looking at ball fields as an investment from the city standpoint because we want to see ball fields and be able to attract new businesses, more tournaments or whatever. The existence of the ball fields also opens up avenues for other business opportunities. For example, hotels. If we had more ball fields, it would be able to, we would also be able to have those investments from places like the Eureka or Mesquite Gaming to have more hotel rooms because we're increasing their demand. And so from that aspect, I think that the city can look at it because then you're looking at creating those business opportunities outside of Mesquite, outside of the city, and in different businesses.
Outside of the city government.
Correct, thank you.
Okay.
Because no, I don't want to see the city ever become solely focused on revenue and income and being a business and looking at the bottom line, because I view the city's responsibility is much bigger than that. But in the areas that I think that it can increase the opportunities for our businesses and allow for them to put more money into our city and our community, I'm absolutely in favor of that.
Okay. If you're elected, what would be the one thing you would most like to work on first?
So the answer that I think you're going to hear a lot, and you've heard it for years, is affordable housing. And the reason for that is because of how it ties into everything. It is very easy to say affordable housing is important. It's more important to understand the reason for it. You can take any other area in this, the issues and challenges that we're facing, and a lot of times you can draw it back to the lack of affordable housing that we have. So for example, medical services. Medical services, if we were to provide for certain services from the city, like the birthing center that the city could potentially be doing, that is an area that is going to require, obviously, more employees, more staff, doctors, nurses, administration. Those are the types of people that are going to come and staff it. Well, in order to staff it, you need to allow for them to live here, and they need affordable housing. And you can do that for any area. So it's important for the city to understand how vital it is for affordable housing and the way that it connects to everything. So I think that when council said that that was the #1 strategic goal, they hit the nail on the head. And it's important, no matter who is elected in November, that needs to be the continuing focus going into next year.
Okay, so let's segue into the next question. You're talking about providing workforce housing.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think should spearhead the effort? Should it be the city? Should it be private developers? Who should be at the forefront driving and developing the housing?
So, short answer, I think that it needs to be I would love to be able to see private industry, private developers come in, see the need, take care of it, and solve the problem themselves. I would much prefer that. However, considering the lack of workforce housing or affordable housing that has been developed over the past several years, I think that it's time for the city to take charge of it, so to speak. And what I mean by that is this. The city has a challenge with regards to a lack of affordable housing, which obviously a lot of people have discussed and we've talked about here. We need to see the city take aggressive action with regards to fixing that problem and addressing that issue. And that's where I want to see the city come from. I would always prefer businesses to be able to come in and fix the problem. And I think that we will ultimately get there. But I think at least in the beginning, you need to see the city take charge, which is why you saw the city council vote that that was the #1 thing that they wanted to focus on.
Well, how would they take charge of that?
So there's a number of things that you could potentially look at. You can look at possible incentive programs. But I think more importantly and more specifically is reaching out to these developers. Both, I would prefer local, but at the same time, if the local isn't giving us the right solutions, then we should be allowed to go to Las Vegas or to Overton or to even St. George or wherever to address that. So the city needs to be going to these developers and they need to be saying, look, we have these great opportunities, these great incentive programs with regards to this land. And then working with the developers in a way that benefits not only the community by providing affordable housing, but makes financial sense for these businesses. Let me say this. I would not expect a business to take a loss to provide a service to the community. That's not their role. They are there, and I understand their role is to make successful business decisions and make money. At the same time, there's a lot of gray areas, so to speak. It's not an either or. You can absolutely work with developers and find out what are some additional incentives that you might be able to need. Can we streamline the service and the development process for you from the city standpoint to make it easier for you so that the city is not viewed as an obstacle with regards to you developing? Can we work with that? I think that if the city's attitude was working with the developers, I think that you would see more developers be willing to come in.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of talk about being business friendly.
Yes.
Do you consider Mesquite to be business friendly?
No.
And do you consider city staff to be appropriately organized? In other words, do we have our staffing priorities in place? And you can answer whichever part of that question first you want.
So I've talked to a number of business owners in town. I've also talked to a number of people that have been involved with trying to bring in new businesses in town. The perception from the people that I've talked to is that the city is an obstacle. So to answer your first question, is the city viewed as a business-friendly area? The answer is no, unfortunately. That's not to say that we don't have wonderful people at the city. That's not saying that there aren't knowledgeable people there that want to help. But the perception has been that the city is an obstacle for businesses. And if that's the case, then the reality is that to these businesses, that it's an obstacle. And we need to work better from the city standpoint to address that. And
How?
Well, there's a lot of things that we could be doing with regards to the way that we communicate with these businesses. So one problem that I have seen, and I've experienced not only with myself in different areas, but also I've talked to business people that they've said the same thing, is that if you go to one particular person at City Hall, you can get one answer. And if you go to a different person, you can get a different answer.
Okay.
That is a problem with regards to the organization at the city. The answer should be the same if you go to one person versus the other. There should be whether you have additional training, whether you have a more effective communication, whether we streamline the process so that when a new business comes to City Hall, we have a packet already made so that you say, here you go, here's the checklist that you need to go, and here are the resources and specifically the people that you need to talk to if you have any questions. We need to ensure that that the city is viewed as a partner with regards to these businesses. If you're coming into our city, we want to make sure that you have every opportunity to be successful. And that starts with the city.
Okay. People complain about the appearance of the downtown corridor, primarily Mesquite Boulevard and Sand Hill Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there are several $1 million available to property owners through the redevelopment agency, RDA, tax fund to help improve the appearance of their properties. What would you do to stimulate businesses taking advantage of those funds? And before you answer that, who sits on the RDA board of directors?
Oh, that is an interesting point. And the RDA board of directors. I believe that Aaron Baker, as city manager, sits on the RDA. He has been the contact that I specifically talked to with regards to the redevelopment funds. I believe that Colton Tierlink is also a part of that board. Beyond that, I would be purely speculating, so I don't want to get too far into that, but I believe those two for sure are on it, or at least when I've talked to them, they're very knowledgeable about it. With regards to your answer or your question about
Yes, stimulating businesses to take advantage of the RDA dollars to improve the appearance of their properties.
correct. So part of it is the limitations of the RDA and the way that it's written. The way that it's written is that it's up to, I believe, $15,000 for, I believe, a sign, $50,000 for with regards to a facade, and then $99,999 with regards to more overall improvements. And that $99,999, which I think has actually been reduced since I last had this conversation with the city manager, to somewhere around $80,000, was a weird number. And so I asked questions about that. The reason for that number is that if you get over that amount, you have to start looking at prevailing wages. And it doesn't make financial sense, is what has been explained to me. So that was an interesting point, and I think that there is something that we could do two ways. One is with regards to the businesses that are currently there that could really use some of that money that's less than $100,000. I think that we should be making an effort to go to them and specifically offering it to them. And saying, look, like we see this, we'd really like to help you out with this, and we'd really like to try to do this. That's an important aspect about it. More importantly, and something that I think that would be really good to look at is there a point where paying prevailing wages makes sense from the city standpoint? So if we have determined that $99,000 is the cutoff because over $100,000 doesn't make sense financially, is there a point where it does make sense financially? So for example, $350,000. If somebody came in and they were willing to drop $350,000 and then the city could match that and it makes sense to pay prevailing wages at that point, I think we should have that opportunity. That would require that we rewrite and we define how those funds are being used. So that is a way that I really would like to get some answers to. I can't promise that that's something that's going to be happening. It's just something I've been thinking about and something I think that we should be exploring.
Okay.